All right, so before we get deeper into, I guess, my ideal path to success, we need to talk about some elephants that just so happen to be roaming around in the room. Uh, the biggest one is um, the effects of past racism on black people today. And this one's an interesting topic because depending on who you ask, um, racism is still alive and strong. Systemic racism is here. There's white privilege. Black people can't get ahead. And then depending on who you ask, all of that's BS, and the other side doesn't know what they're talking about. And I fall almost like perfectly in the middle on this. I feel like as a society, we have to acknowledge and accept that some messed up stuff happened to black people. Um, Slavery did exist. The Jim Crow laws, which means systemic racism, did exist. Redlining, which is systemic racism, did exist. And there was a sense of, during those times, white privilege, where if you were black, just because of the color or tint of your skin, it was almost guaranteed that you would not be able to get ahead. You had to work harder than anybody else around you of a different race in order to be able to succeed. So the question is, how does that compare to today? I believe racism still exists today. You can't get rid of racism. You can't. Because what racism is an internal belief that you are better than, or that your color is better than someone else's. And because everyone is a unique person, anybody can come to the decision that they are better than. So just like there are white people who believe that black people are inferior, there are black people who believe that white people are inferior, and then both black and white people, some of them believe that Jews are inferior, right? So we're not going to sit here and say that racism needs to be eliminated. It's just not possible. It's not a real obtainable goal. And that's where I come down on this conversation, right? Like, I hear public discourse, police brutality, mass incarceration, white privilege, systemic racism, the wage gap for black earners. Like, I hear it all, right? And my stance on it, and what I'm hoping you take away from this is, the best thing you can do is listen to all of it. Listen to every single bit of it. But reserve judgment for your own perceived experiences. And here's what I mean. There are quite a few studies that showed that, on average, most black teens believe that white privilege and systemic racism existed. And then in those studies, the vast majority of them also said they could not find an example of white privilege or systemic racism in their own life. So what that tells me is that as a society, we have already decided to acknowledge the existence of something because it used to exist, without trying to figure out a path forward. And if you look at political discourse today, and you look at so-called black thought leaders today, they all hover around these same tenets. Black people have been oppressed because white people are oppressing us. There's a couple points here that I feel like shred a lot of these arguments to pieces. The first is systemic racism and white privilege. Okay, if you're black, you can't succeed. The fact of the matter is, in today's society, you can succeed no matter what color of your skin, but there are barriers because of where you may be from. What I mean by this is, two black descendants of slaves can have two completely different lives depending on where they're born in this country. So you don't have the same opportunities as someone else who looks exactly like you based on where you're born. If you were born in inner city Baltimore in a ghetto, your chances of getting out of the hood are much lower than somebody else's chances of getting into an Ivy League school if they were a descendant of slavery, but then also born in like Howard County in Maryland, right? So the idea of a systemic racism and white privilege kind of erodes when you look at the geographical differences, the cultural differences between black people and how they affect your climb up the social ladder. So like when you dig a little bit deeper, and I urge people to fact check me on this stuff, it's a well-known fact, right, that the average income of black people is significantly lower than the average income of the United States of America, right? Last I checked, it was like 30-something thousand. Average earned income in America was like 50-something. And so people automatically take that anecdotal evidence, and it's anecdotal because there's nothing to suggest that it's because of racism. They take that anecdotal evidence and they say it is because of racism and it is because of white privilege, right? But then what I ask is, if that is the case, then why is it that when you control for culture, those numbers change drastically? What do I mean by that? Okay, well, black is not a race. Black people is not a race, right? Race is a social construct. What we should be really looking at is ethnicity. And your ethnicity, whether you have dark skin or not, can range from you being truly a descendant of slavery in America, a black African American. That's the only person I would have fixed that title to for African American. To you being black and from Jamaica, or black and from Kenya, or black and from Nigeria, or black and from Ghana, right? And what happens is, if you control for those ethnic differences and the cultural differences that come from having those different ethnicities, you see that it is only black descendant of slaves who are largely unsuccessful in this country. Every other group, except for Somalians, which makes sense because they're a recently failed state, that have immigrated to the country that are black, have a higher average income than the average American income of $55,000 a year. It's only black descendants of slaves that can't hit that mark. And so when you ask why, one of the first things that should be tossed out as a potential reason is racism. Because it's not like when you're applying for a job, they go, oh, so you're African American, but you're not Nigerian American. Okay, well, since you're African American and not Nigerian American, we're going to discriminate against you. But since you're Nigerian American, you can go ahead and get ahead, right? That just doesn't make any sense to me. So what is the reason? And my argument, it's those same cultural and ethnic differences that you need to control for to see that that the average income ranges drastically among black people is the same things that produce the imbalanced income, right? So my whole point is, there are a lot of things that have put us where we are today. There are a lot of things that have put African Americans, descendants of slaves in this country, where we are today. And we can lay that responsibility largely on the federal and state government. We can't say white people, because white's not a race, just like black's not a race, but largely on the federal and state governments and city governments that have been perpetuating the bullshit. But as it stands today, we can't hold them accountable to fix us. We have to hold ourselves accountable to fix ourselves. And how do we do that? How do we, as a ethnicity, black people who are descendants of slaves from America, how do we fix ourselves? And there are quite a few things we could do. The number one thing is we could stop being predators against ourselves. What do I mean by that? So there are a lot of black people in jail, right? We rob, we steal, we kill, just like any other ethnicity, but only we're robbing, we're stealing, we're killing, we're selling drugs to ourselves, right? So you got these drug kingpins in the community that are demolishing the community, and when the police come through to investigate, it's I'm not a snitch. And so here's my question. If your cousin just got killed and you know who killed him, but you're not a snitch, so you're not going to tell the police who killed him, and then that person goes on and kills somebody else, why don't you feel responsible for that? What annoys me about the circumstance, though, is that when there are a lot of murders in a city, one of the first things somebody from a community says is, "Where are the police?" So here's my statement to us. Let's stop killing ourselves, saying that we won't communicate to police officers, and then saying, "Where are the police officers?" when we kill ourselves. So a common retort is, well, police brutality exists, they're killing off black people. Okay, so for the sake of argument, what if the police were systemically racist against black people? How would you fix that? Well, you wouldn't fix it by saying stop snitching, right? Because if you came across a police officer who was abusing their power and being unfairly aggressive to black people, you would need to report that person. But we don't communicate to the police, so we don't communicate when a police officer is abusing their power. So how can we say the police are systemically racist against us when we don't communicate to them when they do stupid shit? Stupid stuff. Does that make sense? So basically what I'm saying is, even if police brutality truly existed as a thing, which I wholeheartedly believe does not, if you look at the statistics on, unarmed black men dying, you would see that you can't just take that number at face value. There are plenty of videos all over YouTube of body cams of unarmed black men doing stupid shit and then getting shot for it. There's one guy last year who literally went off. They said he has a mental illness now, but he went off and started wailing on a police officer, and this guy's begged him for 5-6 minutes, like, hey, what's going on, calm down, you need to stop. And the police officer just the guy's just like, fuck this, I'm gonna beat your ass. And so his partner shot him because the taser didn't work. So yes, that is a instance of a police killing an unarmed black man, but that's not an instance of police brutality. But guess what the family said it was in the beginning, until they released that video. And this is my point, right? And this is something that we do that we need to stop. Every time something happens between somebody who's black and somebody who's white, we automatically frame it in a lens of racism, instead of just saying, is this guy racist or is he an asshole? And then 9 times out of 10, these circumstances that happen to you between a black and a white person, if you ask yourself, is this guy racist or is he an asshole? You find out that he's probably just an asshole. So, to summarize, there are plenty of things we can do as an ethnic group to pull ourselves out of poverty. We can communicate with police officers better. We can hold them accountable when they do dumb shit. There is an internal reporting system. There is a Department of Justice that we can go to and complain if we feel like the Baltimore City Police Department is not duly applying justice to its people. Then we can go to the Department of Justice and say, hey, we've reported all these cases to the IA and they're not doing anything about it. We need your help. So the Department of Justice can investigate, right? But we're not doing any of that stuff. We're not. So police officers are abusing their power when it comes to policing our over-policed communities, because we're creating the crime present that caused the communities to be over-policed. We're not communicating to police officers when these major violent crimes happen, so a lot of these cases are going unsolved. And then when they get in these hyper-aware situations, because all this drama is happening in the neighborhood, and then they abuse their power, we complain about it to the media, we complain about it to our friends and family, but we don't actually follow the actual process of the law to report these officers and make sure they're duly disciplined and hold elected officials accountable when they don't get disciplined. When you take Baltimore as an example and you look at the February riots, and everybody's complaining about police brutality and this and that and third, and then President Obama comes online and he says, hey, yes, the people in Baltimore were right to riot, right? And I'm looking at him like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Sorry. What is wrong with you? I know plenty of black people who lost their jobs because they were working at CVS They were working at Walgreens, these places that got burned down. They were managers, they were pharmacy techs, they were pharmacists, they were cashiers, they were stockers, whatever, that don't have a job because of this riot that you feel is justified. Because police brutality and systemic racism. When the police commissioner is black, the mayor is black, the governor of Maryland is the governor of Maryland might not be a Democrat, but the president is a Democrat. So if anybody anywhere could do something about systemic racism, it would be the mayor of the city, right? Like, you literally choose the police commissioner, you hire that person, and then it's your leadership that dictates the heir of appearance in the Baltimore City Police Department. And we're really going to say that there's systemic racism? Because Baltimore City, you elected that mayor, right? In cities like Baltimore, black people have the majority presence, which means you have the majority vote, which means you decide who goes into office and who does not. If you feel like there's true systemic racism, why are you voting the same political party in the office election year over election year over election year, and then seeing no changes and then blaming the system? You have become the system because you're voting in everybody with no change. Let's stop doing that. Understand that your vote is more important on the local level, at the state level, than it is at the federal level. And the way it should be is that the president, you should not care who the president is. The president should be irrelevant to your way of life. And the person you should care about is the mayor. The person you should care about is the governor, because they should be the ones who are relevant to your way of life. But we have it all backwards. We either don't show up to vote, or we show up to vote for the president and completely ignore local elections. I remember one year, the mayor of Dallas, Texas, got elected on less than 5% of the popular 5% of the overall vote in the city. So 5% of people in that city voted to put the mayor in office. So are there things that the federal government can do to help us get along this way? A couple. We should probably make Election Day an official federal holiday that incentivizes establishments to give people off that day to vote, or at least off half a day to vote. Or we can mandate it in law. We can write a law that says you must grant X amount of hours of paid leave to vote on an election day. I think that's about the only thing that the federal government can do to help. They could make some changes in how we do schooling. Like, I would like to see more fiscally aware classes in high school. Like, we should be teaching students local law as well as federal law. So, like, you know, we should, like, if you're in Baltimore, you should know what a hacking charge is coming out of high school, but no one knows, right? Like, we don't even get told where to find the statutes at in school that we need to follow. But ignorance cannot be used as a defense as to why you violate a statute. So we should be taught that in school. We should be taught financial management in school. Maybe Dave Ramsey's program can be adopted at the national level or at a city or municipality level. That's fine, right? But these things aren't the major factors as to why we aren't getting ahead. We aren't getting ahead because we keep getting told as we grow up that all these things going on in our world are holding us back and you're not going to get anywhere. But then if you look at all of the elite, the black elite in entertainment, and you listen to their life stories about how they got from point A to point B, I don't think I've ever heard any of them say, oh, yeah, well, I'm here, but the only reason why I can't be better than I am right now is because of racism. The only reason why I can't be better than I am right now is because of white privilege, right? Like, every elite black entertainer that I've ever seen says, work hard, be dedicated to your work, you know? So there's definitely a path to take, and we gotta walk back this whole white privilege, systemic racism conversation if it means I can't succeed because of other people, because I can succeed in spite of other people. even if white privilege exists, even if systemic racism exists, if you do these things, you will succeed. That should be the message, but it's not. The message is white privilege exists, white people are racist, the government is out against us, all these policies keep us incarcerated, the police don't like us and they want us to be dead or in jail. So because of all these things, we can't succeed as a people, and that's the reason why we don't succeed as a people. This is more of a rant video than an informational video, but I feel like it's necessary before I start getting into like the detailed topics of what I'm trying to do in this video series. It's very important for you to understand that as a black person today in America, your privilege of being an American outweighs any perceived oppression that comes from being in America. I'm gonna repeat that. That's huge. I should probably put that in the beginning of the video, but I'm not going to because I don't feel like editing this. Your privilege for being an American drastically outweighs any perceived oppression of being America. Your privilege of being an American outweighs any perceived oppression of being in America. Do I need to say that a fourth time? That's huge. It's extremely huge. You can't see where I'm at right now, but let's just say I'm in the Middle East. And there are people in this country that are literally not free. They've had their passports and IDs confiscated from them. And they know that that's what's going to happen when they come to this country. And they do it anyway to earn a living to send back home to their people where they're from. We don't have to worry about that as Americans. As Americans, you have to pay a water bill, but the water that you pay for, that is potable water. You can drink it, you can shower with it, you can cook with it. Here, you pay a water bill, but you can't even drink that water. You still got to go out and buy bottled water. So you go through cases and cases of water a month on top of your water bill. That's a privilege that we have. I could go on, but I'm not going to. I think you get the point. This is becoming a long video. I think most of my videos are going to be this long. I can't help it. So I'm going to repeat it one more time to end this video. Your privilege as an American far outweighs any perceived oppression from being in America. Peace.